One of the things I have to do to the restored transom before I start putting on finishes like sealer and then varnish and possibly paint, depends on what the owner wants to do with the bottom of the boat or the water line, whether it extends around to the transom. I still need to put in two drain holes. There are two here, which is in the engine well, so if water comes over the transom, it comes right back out through these drain holes. And there's also one drain hole here in the bilge. And to do so, I'm using a Forstner bit that's a little oversized of the 1-inch drain tube that was originally in there. I bought 3 new drain tubes, and there's one edge has a flange, and I'll use that flange on this side. If I think I need to, I could always flange the interior end with a flanging tool, but I usually don't. And the reason why I make that oversize is so using a 1 1/8 inch bit is that it allows me to have room around the drain tube that I can put epoxy in. The epoxy thickened will seal the inside of the drain tube opening. Should there ever be any water incursion around the drain tube, it would get to the epoxy and then continue to just be a drain tube. I've seen some boats where that is the drain tube. They don't even put a metal fixture in there. It would also give me room for the 4200 adhesive that will hold the drain tube in the transom cavity. So it has two good reasons for why I do that. And I'll show you exactly why I'm doing that. So this is kind of a three bears approach. I've got a 1-inch tube and a 1-inch hole. Yeah, it would fit in there and I had to pound it in. You have a 1.5 or 1.25, too big. And then there's the 1 1/8, which is just right. Yeah, it allows me again to put the epoxy inside, and then I'll put in 5200 adhesive when I put this in. It'll sit flush there. The flange will cover the glue and sit right there, and I'll have a beautiful looking set of drain tubes. And I'll put in a drain plug that the owner could either do from the inside or outside, depending on their preference, that'll fit this new brass tube. So I'm going to do that by coming in from the back. The transom on the inside still has the original piece of veneer that has the holes that were there, but they're now filled with epoxy. When I did this repair of the transom, I filled those with thickened epoxy so that I would have a pre-thickened hole. So there's a lot of resin that's already gone around those holes. This will give me a place to come in both here and then in the bottom. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in from the back. When that starts to poke through, I will then reverse and come back out here and finish the cut from the outside to give myself a smooth finish. So I'm going to do that right now. As you can see, got a little slosh there for the resin and for the 5200. Have a beautiful looking smooth drain hole. So I'm going to go ahead and do the one on the starboard side and the one in the bilge, and then I'll move on. Before I do any more on the sides of the boat, I need to take care of project here in the bow. The bow eye, like the drain sleeves you saw me put in, I like to bore it out so it's oversized, both on the stern. There's toe eyes in the stern and obviously the bow or the bow where the trailer hooks up and dock if you're tying up. So, this fits fine, but it's raw wood. And I couldn't even get enough 5200 in there or 4200 I'll use on this because it might have to come out someday and I want to be able to do that. So I'm going to bore it out and then I'm going to fill it with epoxy that's thickened. And then I'll go back into the diameter of this shank and it'll go in there and seat here. And then on the back, it's bolted in with a washer, with a nut in a washer. That way I've got it's completely surrounded by epoxy that's thickened. So should there ever be any water that splashes up here or the 4200 fails, water would get into this. So it did not do that, obviously, in all these years, but I'm going to do that with both the stern eye and the bow eye. So what I do is I just take a oversized drill bit and I just chase it back in there, making sure my angle's right. You don't have to go in very far. So now I have a very wobbly piece. So what I'll do is go ahead and now I'll go in there with a little paintbrush and I put unthickened epoxy around it to get it to soak into the wood, which it won't go very far because this is, again, multiple layers of plywood with glue and then heat. So it won't go very far, but I'll just do it as good practice. And go ahead and put some tape on the backside, fill this full, let that cure for a few days, go back in there with a smaller bit. And then when I get ready to put this piece of hardware back on for good, it'll be ready to go. I remember on my Wondercraft, I did this bow eye, and it had a very sharp entry on the bow area. So what I did is I made a foot. This one has a lot more width to it. So I created a foot of that width, just barely able to cover the point. And when that bow eye sat in there, it's really a nice flat fit. Where before in 1957, when they built the boat, they just didn't, I don't know, think maybe that it would go left and right and wobble. That's a very important part of the boat, especially on a trailer. That's what's keeping your trailer and boat together as one, in addition to the stern straps. But I was just really interested in doing something a lot better than that. So I'm going to put a lot of epoxy right here over this foot because it's a little bit hollowed out from being tightened down. And these are really tightened down um, when the boat was built. And I'm just going to kind of paint that in there, make sure I got enough that I can leave a little bit of a foot of fiber or epoxy under that when that thing or that bow eye sits flat here. It's going to have a nice coat of epoxy to sit on. And then I'll go ahead and, of course, bed this with 5200. This will get, or 4200, sorry. This is going to get a piece of aluminum 1/2 inch roll trim. So it'll be protected and those will all get bedded in 4200 when I put that on. So that'll help. In addition, this whole hull in the bottom receive a coat of Smith's penetrating epoxy sealer. So there's a lot of chemicals going into these holes that will help preserve the wood inside in addition to the 4200 bedding compound and paint. So really giving a lot of boots and suspender safety to this boat from the moment I sanded it up to the day I put the last coat of paint on. You saw me hammering on this. What I do is I put in a longer screw into the end of my splash rail, and then I'm able to bend it. This is aluminum, polished aluminum, but you also need something in there to anchor it. And then when I use the hammer, it not only helps bend it, but it heats up the metal. And then when you impact it, grind it, anything, it will heat up. So that also helps it bend. And then I just went along and I leave just a little bit of a profile. I can just feel it every time I do it. I put a little profile and then I sunk the screws. These are new fasteners versus the other holes. And for some reason, they were really close to a 6-inch center, but they weren't. So I think maybe the original builder might have had to drill his own rail holes, so that might be why they were different. I noticed that up in the keel first and just went ahead and did it here, which also brings up another good point. What I'm going to do is, now that I have all of the splash rail, stem, and keel trim dry fitted, I'm going to take it all back off, drill the oversized hole and fill it full of epoxy. And then when I go back to put this on one more dry fit, I will create new holes right through an epoxy plug. So these fasteners will not let water in. And I use bedding compound. I'll use 4200 for both. It's not as tenacious as 5200, but it's good waterproofing, but you can always get it off. And these things will have to come off someday. They're meant to be hit, not meant to be, but they're there to help prevent damage to the boat. Even at $120 a rail for 12 feet now, it's still better than having someone fix a piece of wood underneath. So everything will get bedded in 4200 with the idea that someday it'll come off. And I mentioned before, I've never seen a boat with a piece of trim running down 2/3 of the keel, which is a great idea and probably why it's in such good shape. So went ahead and did that and did the front. Let me show you the front. This is the front piece. What I did is I put in the bow eye, which also has a 5200, an epoxy plug that I drilled back through. Put that in, and then I started my 12 feet from there, and it ended up just a little bit shorter or longer than where it was originally, which is fine. I'm not going to put a stub in there for that. And then I had a shorter piece that I just put in here, and I had to make a little, like a crescent moon shape to kind of fit around the bottom of the front of it. And so that's a good tight fit. That'll all get 4200 as well. And I'll put epoxy, oversized, drill these holes, fill it full of epoxy, and again dry fit it so that new holes are made. And then when the paint goes on, it will be a pretty secure system. Gonna do the rub rails last. I'm not comfortable doing them upside down because I'm not sure what it'll look like. So I'm gonna do that. When I get it flipped over, the paint will kind of be right into here, and I have to do some fairing on top. I'll fit it so it looks perfect there. So yeah, so I'm gonna move on to epoxying those fastener holes, and then I will do a little more CPS soaking up there where that new keel piece was, and give the keel just another coat since I've been drilling in there, and then we'll throw on some primer. So last night I filled all of the holes with unthickened epoxy so that they could soak into the wood and create a thin epoxy, a barrier between the wood And now I'm going to put in the thickened epoxy, which will also do that, but also give the screw um, a tenacious hold within the hole once I re-drill it. So the plan is today that I'm going to put the trim rail back on. Well, I should say tomorrow. This will need a day to cook. I'll put it back on tomorrow, re-drill it, and then the holes will be there. So when I get done with the primer and the paint, there will be a hole there, and I'll be able to make sure that I'm registering it in the right place. Even though starting with the bow eye, the long piece of trim, that's obviously a registering point too. So it'll be a good place. But I just want to make sure I have it pre-drilled. There's just nothing like having everything ready when you go to put that trim back on, because when that trim goes back on, that means that the bottom work, sides and the bottom are done. And because I won't want to turn this boat over on purpose, again, I'm going to want to make sure I put that trim back on before I turn it over and start working on the sides and meaning the covering boards and the deck. So I'm going to finish this up, and then I'll come back in a day and I'll sand that fair, put in my put in the new fastener holes with the rail, and then seal this keel. So all the sanding and things I'm going to do to it even will have another coat on it and be nice and ready to go. And then I'll put the bottom primer on first. So I'm ready to paint, and now I'm going to go ahead and do the primer. I'm using the Pettit Protect Easy epoxy primer. You can only get it in white in gallons, and I don't need a gallon, so I used the gray on a boat a couple years ago, and it turned out to be fine. In fact, it's nice to see that between the white and the gray primer, white bottom, you can see issues, divots and bumps and things. So it's not the worst idea to have a color that's a little off your final. So this is a 3-to-1 primer. I put in this thick, it's really thick, and then this is the activator, so it's 3-to-1. And I didn't do both cans. I do plan on doing this all in one. So every 4 hours, I will be able to put this primer on this boat. So I'll put it on, and I'll come back in 4 hours and do the second coat, and then after that, I'll do the third coat. And after the third coat, I look at the bottom like I would if it needed fairing from day one. Like everything, primer will point out the next set of deviations in the hull that you didn't see, just because wood is a lot more forgiving when you look at it versus paint, and primer, which is shiny, will have a detrimental effect on your surface. It'll show you where you missed. So I'm going to do that, and then tomorrow, after this has all night to dry, I will go ahead and put a harsh light on the hull and look for anything, and then I'll go back again with my fairing compound and make, which usually is just minor corrections. And then I will put on maybe another day's worth of primer just to make sure I've got a really nice bottom coverage. And that'll be it. Because this is a little noxious, It's not bad if you've got a small opening in a paint can. So what I'm gonna do is put on my vapor mask because this has got a two-part, so it's always a little bit harmful. So I wanna make sure I have a good place to, or a good breathing apparatus, but I'm gonna use my vapor filler. What I'll do is I'll put this into a tray, and then I'll just smooth it on with a 3/8 inch nap. You wanna have something with a little hair on it so it'll take up the paint off the tray and then put it back onto the boat. Again, this is not your final coat. It's gonna have a little bit of sanding at the end anyway, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna mask up and get to work. So this is the boat after the second coat on the first day. I'm going to let that dry for 24 hours and then address just some minor, like right here, use a little fairing compound. And right here in the keel. Little things. There's a little, probably a staple, one point. So yeah, I'll go ahead and get that taken care of, and in the meantime, I'm going to 80 grit sand the clear sides as you see them, and go ahead and put on the topside black primer, which I believe is also gray, but it's a one part because it's topside. It doesn't have to be as tough, so that'll go a lot quicker. With the primer I put on the bottom, you have a they call it an induction time. So when I mixed the two parts together, it was a 15-minute wait, and then I went ahead and put it on, and it'll get hard now, and do the fairing compound, sand, and one more coat. Well, it'll be two coats of gray again over the fairing compound fixes, and then on to the white paint. So this is the day after I had the paint fully cure overnight, and then I went ahead with my Total Fair fairing compound by Total Boat, and you can see a few more spots that I addressed, just tiny little ones. You put on paint, you're going to get a shiny surface, and it just allowed me to go ahead and address the areas that I know were going to be there, even though it'll be the bottom of the boat. I don't really care. I want it to be as smooth as I can make it. So I'm going to go ahead now and sand this out. I really have to apologize for me, the audio. My mic just is not working today for some reason. But I want to get this video completed, and tonight's the night. So I'm using the Total Boat topside primer. It's gray under black. I did gray under white there too, but it really doesn't matter in the long run. In order to use the primer, I brought the surface of the boat down to 220 grit, And then I wiped it down with Total Boats Eco Solvent, which is used for like a degreaser. I wet my blue towels and use it as a dust pickup. So you're getting away any grease you might have left, any paint residue, and any dust. So works out pretty good. It says eco-friendly. I still wear a mask, as you saw. I have my vent on or fan on right now because it's just, I don't find it to be terribly pleasant to be around without a mask, especially when I'm over it. So what I'm gonna do, this is a 1-part primer and it's a single coat. Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. I have not used this before, but it has good reviews and I'm gonna try it. And that's why I use the same family when it comes to solvents, thinners, and paints, try to keep them the same. And this plays well with other 2 parts. So I'm gonna do a little bit of an overlap here where the boot stripe's gonna be. So I'm not gonna tape it. I know exactly where the water line will be. So I'm gonna just go ahead and do a little overlap. In the end, I'll have a gold stripe over that, so it won't matter. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. It says to use foam rollers. I am gonna keep some mohair on reserve in case it's not picking up enough paint. I'm gonna go to the mohair. I find mohair really good for first coats of varnish and paint when you really wanna get a coat on there. They're talking about thin though, so I think that's why they're talking about using a foam roller. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with the foam and put my mask on because it's all paint to a point. If it's not latex, it's got a little issue. So I'm gonna mask up before I do that and I'll show you what it looks like. So here is the finished product. It, as advertised, it dries fast. So I really had to keep at it. And real happy with it. It's a good dull finish. And it really points out some areas that I missed with sanding and fairing, even though I was really going at it. I'm glad I was able to put the primer on and figure out areas that I have to now go back and spend some time on, like I did with the bottom. So that's good. The boat is now primed, and I will then start to put the white on the bottom and then the black on the sides, and then add that boot stripe. Well, that'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for tuning in. If you're not a subscriber, please think about doing so. If you're enjoying the video series or this video and found it to be both entertaining and hopefully instructional, please hit the like button. It's always nice to have positive feedback. And I will see you in 2 weeks when this boat will have black paint on the sides, white paint on the bottom, and a pinstripe or boot stripe, and I'll show you how I did that. Take care.